According to data cited by the Ford government, Toronto has the third longest travel times in the world. In an effort to speed things up, Ontario targeting bike lanes, and the province will soon be introducing legislation that will require municipalities to gain provincial approval in order to replace existing vehicular traffic lanes with bike lanes. So joining us today is Ontario's Transportation Minister, Prabmeet Sarkaria. Thank you so much for coming in today.
Thanks for having me.
The one argument, Minister, would be that bike lanes don't create traffic, cars create traffic. And so in an argument, would this be backwards thinking almost?
Well, look, we've got to take a reasonable approach to this. I think there's absolutely a role for bike lanes in the city and to have bike lanes, but our major roads, whether you talk about Yonge Street, Bloor Street, University Street, we see the amount of traffic volume on those and the challenges. Gridlock is at an all-time high. It takes people much longer to get to where they need to go. And so we need to reevaluate, as many of these bike lanes have been put at the expense of vehicle lanes across the city and across the province, that we really look at this closely.
Yeah, I don't think anyone's arguing that something needs to be done with congestion in big cities like Toronto and in different municipalities. Whether or not bike lanes is the way to go is the question mark. Are you then going to be looking at the process of removing bike lanes on some major arteries that we are seeing, like Bloor?
Well, look, what we've seen is some of the data. We want to understand what is the data that was used in the last 5 years to put a lot of these bike lanes in. We know that the winter months aren't taken into consideration with respect to some of the data. We know that when it's raining, that data is not counted. We know that when it's too hot, data on cycling is not taken into consideration. So, for example, on Bloor Street, when you have 25,000 plus cars using that, and then, speaking to the small businesses and the impacts it's had on them on the Bloor Street and other areas of the city where these have been put forward, we know that there's more to consider. Like I said, there's absolutely a role for bike lanes in the city. We want to have them, but it has caused major congestion on roads like Bloor, University, and Yonge, and we need to have a bit more of a reasonable approach to putting those forward.
Okay, so those arteries will be looked at under review, and as you mentioned, those who have been installed for over the last 5 years, that could be up for debate, basically.
Yeah, we'll understand the data that was used to put them forward. Look, I've heard in the last couple of years there was a lot that were put in place when people weren't back at work or they weren't commuting as much. So we have to look at the impacts on small businesses. We have to look at the impact on gridlock. We have to look at the impact on time when we're removing lanes of traffic to accommodate for the bike lane. So congestion is a real issue, and we've got to do everything we can to solve it.
Legislature will resume October 21st, so this will go forward. Also a plan to increase speed limits at some 400 series highways, actually all of them. The conversation about congestion also increases with the 407 and the idea of moving transport trucks on over to strictly the 407 to help with congestion. What is your government thinking in that process?
Well, we have to build new highways. The opposition has been focused on trying to stop the government from building the 413, the Bradford bypass. We've put forward a new study to the feasibility of the tunnel. We need more capacity. We're growing at an exponential rate. Just in the past 2 years, we've seen over 1 million people come into Ontario, and we need to make sure that the infrastructure and our roads keep up with that. So the issue is capacity. We know the population is growing. Let's build the Highway 413. Let's build the Bradford bypass, because we know by the end of 2030, a lot of our highways will be at absolute capacity. And gridlock will get worse, and travel times will get even worse.
I have a feeling we'll be talking very soon again, because this is an ongoing issue. Minister Sarkaria, I appreciate you taking the time. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.